Greetings, friends. Obviously, I'm not an expert in Iran or geopolitics, so you just take me as a guy on the internet. But because I follow podcasts about geopolitics, obviously the Iran issue comes up. I've imbibed lots of Alex Christoforou, Alexander Mercoris, Brian Berletic, Academic Agent, and some other, maybe Danny Haifong, and obviously spend a lot of time on X, perusing and seeing what people have to say. So I'm just going to offer some, not even my own reflections, just things that I agree with, of course, that other people would say these things. For me, the thing that stands out about this conflict between Israel and the United States versus Iran is that how are you going to win a war to bring down the Iranian regime, because that's what it's about. The nuclear issue is just a pretext to bring down the Iranian regime. But how are you going to do that with a missile campaign alone? Iran is a huge country. It's bigger than Ukraine, significantly bigger than Ukraine. And Russia has fired many, many missiles at Ukraine for 3 years. And it's had an effect, but it hasn't brought down the country. I mean, they are going to eventually win the war, but the missiles won't be the decisive reason. The reason that Russia's going to win the war is because of ground forces, because of an actual invasion. So Iran, I don't see how it could have a regime change just from missiles alone. I guess they're hoping that the people will rise up and overthrow the regime. And it's true that the regime is unpopular, or at least that's what I understand, or a large segment of their population doesn't like the regime. But then I see Iranians in the West. I don't see too many of them, but I've seen them marching with liberal values and feminism and flying the rainbow flags. I've seen them here in Toronto, so I don't know. Obviously, they don't like the Iranian regime. So I'm not surprised that those people wouldn't like a fundamentalist Islamic government. But I'm not expecting them to rise up and overthrow the government. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out. But I don't know, maybe Iran could fall. Maybe it'll be like Syria, but Syria is a smaller country than Iran. But again, Syria fell because of a ground invasion. Obviously, there were air forces involved, and that ground invasion was backed by Turkey, by Erdogan. And they got terrorists basically to come in there. And now there's like who was formerly recognized as a terrorist by the United States, the leader of Syria, or leader of whatever fragment of that chaotic country that's been destroyed because of the Western involvement. Now, they want to do that to Iran. Iran is the final piece of the puzzle. They've actually been fairly successful over the last few decades because they got Libya, they got Iraq, they got Afghanistan. I don't know if Afghanistan was part of that plan. Afghanistan, of course, was botched, but they did get all the immediate neighbors of Israel, most of them. If they didn't do it with a war, then they did it by basically getting the elite onto their side, like in Saudi Arabia, getting them on board with the empire. But Iran was always stubborn. Iran was always going to oppose Israel and the United States. So how are you going to do this with just missiles? That's my main point. I don't see that happening with only missiles, only bombs, all your toys. A lot of the missile stocks have already been sent to Ukraine. The U.S. has sent so many weapons and missiles, ATACMS missiles, HIMARS, to Ukraine. And where could a ground force... So you'd have to have a ground invasion if you really want to overthrow the Iranian regime. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we find out. I mean, again, no one expected Syria to fall that fast. So maybe something like that could happen in Iran if the army gives up. Because in Syria, what happened was there was a ground invasion, and the Syrian army essentially gave up and fled. Now, there was internal corruption. There were a lot of, obviously, generals who were traitorous, and people were bought off and paid for. So that was, and that's happened in Iran. Iran is heavily infiltrated by Israel, by Mossad, and America. And that's getting to the other question of who's actually in control here. That's the other part I want to get into in this video. I don't want this video to be too long. But I don't see how are you going to have a land invasion come into Iran? Like, first of all, that's not going to happen. Politically, it's just not feasible. The U.S. doesn't have the army it did in 2003 when they invaded Iraq. because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just not the same military. Even probably their just logistical capabilities are not the same as what it was in previous decades. And to expect them to invade Iran, a huge country, a mountainous country with 90 million inhabitants, I don't know. I mean, again, if it's a fragile regime and a fragile army, then one thing can lead to another. So maybe it could happen, but I'm very skeptical of a ground invasion even happening. Everyone thinks they can just, well, not everyone, but the warmongers always think it's going to be easy and you can just do this bombing campaign. Well, you did bomb Serbia into submission, but that's a tiny country, Serbia, in the late 90s. There's not too many other cases where bombing can just win the war. There are some cases maybe, but I don't see how this is going to be easy at all. You would need ground forces to go in there, and where would they enter from? Because in Iraq, the ground forces entered from Kuwait, and in the case of Syria, of course, Syria was already divided, so the anti-Assad forces, the ones who opposed the leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, they entered from a region of Syria, I guess close to the Mediterranean Sea, which was contiguous with the Assad-controlled region. So they had a direct crossover point. Of course, they were backed by Turkey, and the northern part of close to Turkey, that region of Syria was kind of ambiguous, so there was probably some infiltration from there. I don't know the specifics, but my point is that they had an obvious entry point. The U.S. forces had an obvious entry point in their 2003 invasion of Iraq from Kuwait, their puppet, or at least their little friend, their convenient little friend there. So now with Afghanistan, I guess they didn't have a direct land route in. I don't know. It's more confusing to me with Afghanistan because it seems there were CIA forces involved there, and special forces already established some zones of control. How they got in there, I'm not sure, maybe in more clandestine ways, but they established safe areas for U.S. troops to land. So I'm not a historian on these matters, but I'm presuming that American soldiers just basically flew into Afghanistan and they weren't shot down. I guess because the government there didn't have that technology. So, but Afghanistan's not the same situation as Iran. Afghanistan was a fairly low intensity conflict, though it did go on for many, many years, 20 years or so. But Iran, again, might have similar level of corruption. Maybe it's obviously not on the same level as Western countries. Like, they have a lot of gaffes. Like recently, when one of their political leaders of the country was killed in a helicopter accident not that long ago, like about a year ago. Just so they've had a lot of stumbles, but again, they still have a huge state, huge bureaucracy. It's entrenched, or at least the government forces the centers of power, the people who are organized. I believe that they're not going to be that easy to dislodge, and they have a lot of missiles. No one knows the true stock of the Iranian missiles. This is getting into their conflict with Israel, which I'll move to. But again, just tying up my first point is I don't see where a ground invasion would begin. Where are you gonna land? Where are you gonna land? You have to invade from the sea. You have to go up in there with your navy and launch an invasion, or what are you gonna parachute men into Iran? Maybe, but this is just so difficult to contemplate. I don't see that happening right now. Again, maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm pretty skeptical of that happening. I think they're going to make a big fireworks show. They're going to try and blow up these nuclear facilities. I don't know if that's going to work. We'll find out. But inevitably, a lot of these things are buried underground. Now, getting to Trump. Trump is basically lost control. He's not really, probably doesn't want the war, but he's cooperating with the neocons. He's basically surrendered to them at this point. So it's essentially like he's becoming irrelevant, actually. This is going to destroy his presidency. He's becoming completely irrelevant. He has no spine. He willingly cooperates with the war machine, and he acts like a mob boss. I'm paraphrasing him, but he made a post on Truth Social where he says, "Cooperate or we'll murder you," a comment directed to the supreme leader of Iran. So he's threatening the leader of a nation with a long history and a huge population with death. Like, this is not the way any foreign leader is supposed to conduct themselves. Very barbaric times. You want to be part of this country, like Canadians in Canada, you 51st staters, you want to be part of this empire? Like, what are you, nuts? And of course, Trump in America has shut out a large portion of his base. He's now antagonized Tucker Carlson, and he's basically antagonized Tulsi Gabbard, director of intelligence, who said not long ago that Iran is not realistically pursuing nuclear weapons or does not have any possibility of developing them, at least within a few years. That's not realistically going to happen. So her message is at odds with Trump. Trump said he doesn't care what she said. He said that to the media. He doesn't care what his own director of intelligence says. And he must be angry, and he's probably really pissed off right now. But he's a weak man. We're seeing that. The second part I wanted to contemplate is this idea that Jews control the world, Israel controls the United States. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% true or 100% false. Let's just take that as something that we have encountered, those of us in the right, those of us who are interested in world affairs. That's a worldview we're going to encounter. Oh, so let's consider that in light of these events. I would like to know, how do Jews, and I'm not necessarily trying to shoot down this worldview, but I have some important question, well, at least one basic question. How is it that if Jews control the world, then their one and only nation state is getting hammered by Iranian missiles, or at least for some days, even if Iranian missiles may be going down, maybe they do defeat Iran, but still put at significant risk, seeing that their Iron Dome is not as impenetrable as it was sold out to be, feeling exposed, feeling at risk. Something doesn't check out here with the narrative about how, Jews don't, they're not, obviously they're not going to put themselves at risk. They'll make the white men go and fight their wars and die. And to an extent, that's true. That obviously the Southern men, they make up the majority, or historically made up the majority of the U.S. military. I don't know how it is now because of all the DEI, but they would have been the majority of the people who went to Iraq and fought. If you believe that story, that it's all because of the, taking out Israel's enemies in their neighborhood. But there's another idea that it might be just that the neocons are using Israel the same way they used Ukraine, as an ice pick to fracture the Middle East. And the British set it up, of course, with cooperation with Jews, but it was the British Empire and then taken over soon after by the American Empire, supporting Israel militarily, financially. And you could say that Israel controls America. Obviously their tribe, the tribe to which Israelis belong, has a powerful lobby in America. They have AIPAC, they have, much financial, media, cultural power. However, does it really make sense to say that Israel, a small country, less than 10 million people, controls America, a country of multiple hundreds of millions of people, just on the other side of the world? It doesn't make sense. It makes more sense that actually Israel is a colony of the West, started by the British, taken over by the Americans. Because the British Empire and the American Empire, there's a natural continuity. A lot of those things were taken over, not entirely, but in some regards, the Americans inherited the British Empire. I don't mean that physically in all places, but in some regards, they became the one world hegemon, free markets for many of the decades, free markets, liberalism, this kind of thing that the British had previously spread. So they use Israel as a colony purposely to create instability in the Middle East so that they can topple these dominoes one by one. And Iran has been at the top of their list for decades and decades. Ever really since the Iranian Revolution against the Shah, who was Western-backed in the 70s. That's when the Western elites turned their attention to using Israel as a means to go at Iran. So it doesn't make sense to me that in the simplistic idea that, well, Jews or Israel controls the world, and yet they're getting hit by missiles and some of their own citizens are dying in the worst violence that's happened for many years in terms of these kinds of attacks. How are you going to square that with they're also the ones totally in control? Because it's not white Americans getting hit by missiles. It's the Jews in Israel. The Israelis are getting hit by missiles. Not the white wasp not the goy that they supposedly control 100%. The goy is actually just in America, like, not getting hit by missiles. Please square that for me. We might just conclude that, well, this tribe is willing to throw some of its own people under the bus, because obviously some of the powerful people in America are going to be of this tribe. Many of the politicians will be, and if they're not of the tribe, then they're working closely with them. Because if it's true that the Israeli government knew about the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel before it occurred and allowed it to take place, to use it to justify a war in Gaza, it makes sense. I don't know if that's 100% true, but it seems that there's justification to believe that they had known that this attack would occur and allowed the initial attack to occur. And of course, and that's without even getting into the history of who created Hamas. But I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak on that, but that's an interesting thing to look into. So again, there's this other angle. Okay, well, so they're in control. So are you saying that powerful Jews in this worldview, powerful Jews in America control neocons, or basically direct neocons, or are neocons, and direct America to use Israel to further these wars for the global American empire in the United States, which will sacrifice Jews, which will put Jews at risk in the process. Something's not checking out here unless you're willing to admit that these people are willing to throw some of their own under the bus. But aren't they supposed to be the most, the strongest, maybe not nationalist is not the right word, to some extent nationalist, but they look after their own surely as much as any people in the world. Like, they're known for doing that, for taking care of their own, right? Or are they? I don't know. Maybe the picture's a bit more nuanced here. Because if you really wanted to look after your own, and you created your one and only nation state, what are you doing provoking countries which aren't directly attacking you? Sure, they have some neighbors there that might not be the friendliest, but Iran was not about to attack Israel. Iran did not want to do that. The Iranian regime, as bad as it may be, as unpopular as it may be, is interested in surviving. They're not interested in starting a war with the United States via its colony, Israel, via its proxy, Israel. And it checks out with Ukraine, because if they're using Ukraine as a proxy, why wouldn't they be using Israel as a proxy? And they're almost in the same manner, just in different regions of the world. One is up north to destabilize Russia. One is a bit down south to destabilize Iran. And Iran is the soft underbelly of Russia. And Iran is the backyard of China. And they want to go after China and Russia, essentially China in the end. So Iran is a vital puzzle piece to that. But that's only in the picture of the global American empire. This tiny little sliver of Israel, this tiny little sliver, that's controlling America. Where do you think the real power is? Obviously, it's in America. But then the same tribe is in America. So they're in control, but they'll sacrifice their own people in that tiny little sliver, which is an ice pick, a strong front line with sharp tools and sharp weapons, but no strategic depth. Their backs are against the sea. Any invasion or any serious attack there, they would have nowhere to go. There's not many of them there. What do you think the powerful people of the world would locate themselves there? You wouldn't want to be there. You would want to get out of there in this sort of situation. So something's more complicated here than the narrative we've been told about, well, Israel just controls the United States. That doesn't make sense to me anymore. Maybe you can square it for me. Maybe Brian Berletic is right. It's really just the neocons using Israel. It's the neocons who are the aggressor. They're using Israel. I mean, Ted Cruz isn't Jewish. You could say, oh, well, he's influenced by AIPAC, but does AIPAC order him? Do they actually control him? Maybe it's more of a beneficial relationship. But for whatever reason, these people cooperate together and they use Israel, the nation state of Israel, created in 1948, is their convenient colony. It's their forward operating base. And though there aren't American military bases right in Israel, there are American military bases all around the world and in the Middle East, surrounding these countries, ominously, as a threat. Like, Lindsey Graham is not Jewish. He's one of the main forces pushing for this war. Evangelical Christians who are Zionists are obviously not Jewish. They're pushing for this war because they believe in dispensationalism. They believe in a heresy. They think there's a different covenant there's a different relationship that Jews have to the one true God than Christians have. So the Jews aren't required to accept Jesus as God. No, that's a heresy. That's being condemned as a heresy. And Ted Cruz was wrong to not understand that Israel in the Bible was not referring to the 1948 nation state. It's referring, yes, in some sense to the Jewish tribe, but as it's understood by the Orthodox Church, to be the body of believers, the true Christians today, the body of Christ on earth today, which in my perspective is the Orthodox Church. We would say we are Israel. So Tucker Carlson was not wrong to point this out he didn't point that specifically out to Ted Cruz, but he pointed out to Ted Cruz that there's basically a word concept fallacy going on here. Just because you see Israel in the Bible, that's not referring to the 1948 nation state that was created at that. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I only wanted to speak for a few minutes, so it's already been like more than 20 minutes for this video. And again, by the time this comes out, it'll be probably Thursday or like May 19th or May 20th, and then these events may be developing rapidly. So we'll see if we're actually in an active war with the United States, but obviously that would be vastly unpopular for much of Trump's base. Because as disillusioned as I am with much of MAGA, there's also a lot of sensible people there. And they're going to see right through this thing. And it's just one in the same succession. We had I don't remember the exact chronology here, but Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. I was 17 years old when the Iraq war was drummed up. And this is another reason why I'm reacting the same way right now. I was a shit lib in 2003, but I was still able to see that was bullshit. And it was. And this is bullshit. Hasta luego, amigos.